everyone. Hi, it looks like we are now live. I see you guys starting to come in. All right, awesome. Hi. Hi. Hi, Anne. Hi. All right, I see a whole bunch of you coming in. All right, so today we have a great live. Hi, Samantha. I see you coming in with Samantha. I am about to add you in. Let's see here. You in. Let's see if I can get you in quickly. I'm also going to request you. All right. Hi.
Hello, so good to see you.
See you. You have something lucky in you because this is the first time I have been able to get connected right away in months.
Win-win. This is great. This
All
was
right.
meant to be.
Meant to be. All right, so today we have a really great live on sleep and healthy sleep. It's such a practical topic that it always does well because, I mean, with kids, it's always a struggle. So we have Samantha here. She is a sleep coach and is a wealth of knowledge on so many things. So I'm excited to get started. Sam, just go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we're going to jump right in.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Samantha Day, and I have been a pediatric sleep coach and a behaviorist for children for about 10 years now. I'm a mother of two. I have a 9-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son, and I homeschool them part of the time and then also work part of the time. So a good balanced life. But my passion work-wise is to show families that sleep is possible because there's a lot of controversy, unfortunately, around that these days. And so I use my professional background, both in behavior and in sleep, to get to the place where every family can get sleep no matter your parenting style. And that's where some of that controversy comes in. We all need sleep no matter what our viewpoints are.
Yeah, for sure. And there's so many like really practical things that you talk about. But first let's get started with the structure because I think that's I mean the first thing that parents get wrong and the first thing that there's questions about. So how important is routine and timing?
Oh, it's routine is everything because routine communicates, right? And so, just as us as adults, we should hopefully get to the place where we have a little bedtime routine before we go to sleep. It tells our brain and calms our body that, hey, it's time for sleep soon. And we want to do that with our kids as well. And that can happen from the infant stage to the toddler and childhood stage and then continue into teenage adult and so on. So routine is just communication and it really prepares us for what's next. So as an infant, that might simply be a routine where we, change their diaper and put on their pajamas and go ahead and give them their feeding or use the lights to communicate, right? So that we're turning off the lights when it's time for sleep and not just preparing the room. So we go in there and it's like all of a sudden ready. We can use that as a communication piece with them to show them what's next. And that's where the importance of the routine comes in, communicating what's next.
One of the things that I came across, and I really wanted your opinion on this, is essentially how bad screens are right before bed. So we all talk about screens and, they're never going to go away. And a healthy routine with them is so important. But this actually paints a picture for why. So apparently kids have an issue falling asleep, sometimes up to 30 minutes longer when they actively use screens right before bed. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so it depends. This is, of course, true, and it's a general recommendation that's really important for us to do some research on and for parents to figure out how screens are going to fit within their families. Every human is going to be affected by a screen right before they go to sleep, but there are some children that are significantly more affected than others. So we're all affected and some even more so. So what it happens is that light actually stimulates the exact part of our brain that puts us to sleep. So we're creating stimulation in that part of our brain, and then we shut off the screen, we put it aside, and sometimes that's hard to separate from for a toddler or a child. It's almost like I need more, I need more. And when we finally separate from that screen, that part of our brain is now like, wait, I had to go from all this stimulation to a sleep within a short period of time. And it's really, really difficult to do. So I typically recommend that if we're going to have screens, that we should do it at least an hour prior to when we do our bedtime and get ready for bed. If for your family, watching a family show together before bedtime is something that happens sometimes, then let's try to have that on like a TV screen away on the other side of the room and not on an iPad that's right in our face, if that is something that works for our family. But about 30 to 60 minutes for sure prior to bed.
Yeah, and oh, just to be sure, because of course everybody can be alarmist with screens, and some of it is warranted. But the point was that it was interactive. So like when kids are clicking through YouTube and not necessarily watching a show, and then of course you can always make sure that a show is maybe calmer with less speed and transitions and stuff like that. That's always a great thing to help you.
Absolutely.
But I thought you would have a great point with that. So just moving on. I loved the insight that you had with basically phasing out noise machines because I think that in the beginning that is something that parents are like it works so well, and I don't want it all the time, or I don't want it to be a crutch. So what do you recommend?
So here's what I would say on that. I am a 39-year-old woman who still chooses to sleep with a sound machine every single night. And the reason that I do that is because for me personally, that white noise is calming and communicates to my brain that I'm going to calm down and go to sleep. Now, that's not true for everyone, but if you think for a second about us as adults, we almost all have something, whether it be a fan on when we're falling asleep or a TV on in the background, which isn't the healthiest thing, but many of us do, right? And so having some type of auditory stimulation going on when we're about to fall asleep is super common. So now bring that to our babies. When they're in our womb, the sound in there is actually louder than a vacuum, with just the blood running through our bodies and that continuous noise. So then they come out and they're born and it's like, what is this silence, right? And it's a very different auditory communication to their brain. And so that's why as a baby, oftentimes white noise will be very calming for our little ones. So for those families that choose to use it and continue to use it, I would say the biggest thing is we don't want it too loud. So if we're looking on a scale of 10 being the loudest that our sound machine will go, I normally recommend about half of that would be the loudest. And you can go lower than that, but we definitely don't want to go too high because it can actually wake us up in the transition of our sleep cycles and make it more difficult for us to sleep if it's too loud. So first and foremost, make sure it's not too loud. Then if we're going to have white noise on, we want to make sure it goes on all night. Some families will turn on music or white noise at the start of the night and put a timer on it. So then an hour in, it turns off and our child's already asleep. The problem comes in if then in the middle of the night they wake up between sleep cycles and the environment has changed. And some babies or toddlers or children are like, what is different? What's going on? So whatever our environment is at the start of the night, we want it to continue that way through the rest of the night until the morning. So for those families who want to keep using it, I actually don't think there's anything wrong at all with continuing to use a sound machine if their family thinks that that's good and if their child wants it. I have one child that really wants it every single night and the other that could doesn't really care either way. If it's on or off, doesn't bother him. For those that want to fade that white noise, it's one or the other. We either cold turkey get rid of it and just make a choice that we're not going to use it anymore, or we fade it by turning it down a little bit more and a little bit more each night until it's gone. One more thing about that though is that we live in a culture where we have white noise at our fingertips, right? Whether it's we travel with a white noise maker or an app on our phone that's so easy to put it on. For those that choose to keep it, it is easy to use it when we're traveling or in the car or whatever it is, simply as a way of communicating to our brain that it's time for sleep and not as a crutch, just as a calming mechanism, the same as we use many other calming strategies.
Or actually, that's a great point. Like you taking it when you're traveling to kind of prompt that. That's a great idea. Actually, so that's a great transition. So how do you deal with sleep when you're traveling? Okay,
Yeah,
when there's like a difference in your
yeah,
routine.
that was a good transition. I like that. So one of the things we can do is make sure that we're trying for our babies and our toddlers and children to connect sleep at home to sleep when we're away. So obviously it's going to be different when we're away, but is there anything we can do to connect the two? So we were just talking about noise. A lot of times when we go and we sleep at a hotel or a condo that we rented or whatever the case is, the noises are different than what we're used to. So whether it be the person next door who's making a lot of noise or a sound outside or creaking in the house we're not used to, and those types of things will wake us up way more because we're not used, our subconscious brain is still aware and we're not used to that, right? And so having a sound machine in that situation connects that auditory from when I'm at home and sleeping to when I'm away and sleeping. There's a lot of statistics that go into the first night on a trip away from home is typically the worst night of sleep. And that usually has a lot to do with the noise that's going on around us. And then it typically gets better from there. But something like a sound machine connects home sleep to away sleep.
Yeah,
Then,
that's really cool. Go ahead,
yeah,
Steph.
yeah. And then when we are thinking about, especially our toddlers and our young children, sleeping in a new space doesn't always feel comfortable. There can be some fear associated with that. So I typically recommend that when you're traveling, go and bring something that's connected to them, whether it be a security blanket, a stuffed animal, something that they love, bring that. And then allow them to be a part of setting up their sleep environment during the day before it's even time to go to sleep, if possible. So, they're in the hotel room with you and maybe they get to make their little bed and they get to put their stuffed animal and get ready, for that space when the time comes. That gives us time to get used to the space before we're just saying, okay, good night. And it also allows them to have control over their environment. And having control over a new space for a toddler or young child is powerful when traveling.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all really great points. And so how do you deal with, for example, time change? So something where the routine is also being changed, but it's not really because you traveled anywhere. It's just life happens, right?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, sometimes time change happens when we travel, right? And so
Yeah.
that's like if we're traveling to a different time zone, that's one way to answer it would be sometimes when we travel, the time zone in the new location actually fits our vacation better. So, for example, maybe we're going an hour ahead. So, really, we can just stay out a little bit later, right? But keep the times on the clock similar to what they were at home. So, if bedtime is 8 o'clock at home, it's 9 o'clock when we're somewhere else, which allows us a little bit more flexibility. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
But if you have a large time difference, like you're traveling to a different country or something like that, you'll want to start preparing ahead of time, ideally, for that time change before you go and travel. So those are a few traveling tips with time changes. There's a lot more that goes into that. But when we're talking about time changes at home, which is naturally in the fall and the spring one is typically much easier than the fall because we're springing forward, we're losing an hour, and it's easier to deal with one less hour a day usually than one more. Because in the fall, when we fall back and we gain an extra hour, we have to figure out what to do with that. So our child that was typically up at 7 a.m. is now waking at 6 a.m. Or if you have an early riser who's usually up at 6, now they're waking at 5. And no parent wants to wake up when the clock says 5. So that is something where we need to look at the personality of our child. There are some children and babies who are really flexible, that really if I miss a nap or if bedtime's later, it doesn't really affect me. I'm still going to sleep my normal amount. And for those kids, a time change really doesn't affect us too much. But if we have a child who a single nap missed or, a bedtime 15 minutes later will make them wake up an hour earlier in the morning, they're just very sensitive to their timing of sleep, then we want to prepare ahead of time for those time changes. So I usually will start walking parents through those adjustments, especially for the fall time change, about a week prior to the time change actually happening. And we'll slowly start moving the clock back in the child's body. And then by the time we get to the time change on that Saturday night, we're typically good to go. So I have a podcast episode on that walks families through step by step how to do that. If they are like, okay, I need directions, I have a podcast episode that'll walk them through that.
I'll try to throw a link over in our stories to your podcast after, and so parents can try to find that there.
Wonderful.
So actually, let's because we're transitioning so well. Talking about short
Mhm.
naps, what do they mean? Because sometimes parents get worried, like, this kid is not napping that long, or these naps are just don't, they're frequent, but they're always short.
Yeah.
Is that something to worry about? And what do
So,
you think?
so it depends on the situation. There's a couple of things we would want to investigate first before we determine if it actually is a short nap and if it's negative towards their body in any way. So what I mean by that is, based on the age of your child, that will determine how long their sleep cycles are. So, when we're talking about a 4 month old, a typical sleep cycle is between 30 and 45 minutes. So, we could lay our baby down and they're awake 30 minutes later, and we're like, what in the world? Why are they awake? We just laid them down. But really, they made it through an entire sleep cycle at that point. And a short nap does not necessarily mean a bad nap if a couple things, if it's properly timed for their age and if they're able to make it through one full sleep cycle. Eventually, we're hoping that they can connect those sleep cycles and have an hour long or an hour and a half long nap, right? But in the beginning, especially with our babies, short naps can be all that they need at that time. As they get a little bit older, our sleep cycles get longer. So around a year old, we're probably at 45 to 60 minutes for one full sleep cycle. And then usually by preschool age, we're at about 90 minutes and it'll remain that way until we're adults. Our sleep cycles are about 90 minutes long for us as well. So it's really important to just focus on how long the sleep cycle is, and then is the nap shorter than that? So if we take a 12-month-old who's sleeping 20 minutes and then they're awake, then we need to be concerned a little bit and figure out what's going on, because at that point, they're falling asleep, they're making it through the light part of their sleep cycle, and then they're awake. They didn't even make it through the whole sleep cycle. And so that's where we would be a little bit more concerned, is why are we not making it through all the stages of deep sleep and REM sleep and so on? And we would start to focus on that.
Um, and so you answered part of this.
Mhm.
You cover essentially how to set a bedtime routine or schedule based on age, and I'm assuming that you mean that it should be based on their development and how long the sleep cycles are for that age.
Yep.
But what, can you elaborate on that? And then also, what do you mean by setting it by peak melatonin
Oh,
levels?
yes. So when we're talking about what time should bedtime be, we're going to look at a couple different things. So between the ages of 4 months and about 5 years old, melatonin is going to peak and be at its highest state, typically between about 6 and 8 p.m. when our families are on typical schedules. Now, if you have a family that works third shift and it's an opposite, this is not for them. But the average family with average, sleep hours, the baby and toddler is going to hit that melatonin between 6 and 8 p.m. So we want to try to grab bedtime somewhere in that range of time so that we can kind of ride that wave and get sleep as deep as possible throughout the rest of the night. That's going to help us make it through the night with hopefully less or no night wakings when they're able to.
Wow.
So we really want to grab it at that time, but we also want to focus on how long has my baby or child been awake between the last time they wake up and bedtime. So for example, if we have a 16-month-old who takes one nap a day, typically we're hoping for about 6 hours or so between the time they wake up and nap time. And then usually about 4 to 6 hours between nap time and bedtime. So we have a window that's, between 4 and 6 hours, and a bedtime that's between 6 and 8 p.m. So that we got to do a little math here, but we want to be in those ranges so that they're not awake for too short of a period of time before bedtime or too long of a period of time. So to build on that, the 16-month-old, maybe they take their nap at 10 o'clock in the morning and they're up by 11. And now we're up from 11 all the way till bedtime. That's difficult because their body will start to overproduce cortisol, which is that stress hormone, and make it really difficult for them to actually fall asleep when bedtime comes because it's been too much time. And the opposite is true for that 16-month-old. Maybe they don't nap till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They fall asleep on the couch at 3 p.m. and they're up at 5. Well, now there's only 3 hours before bedtime, and that's not enough time. So we do want to look at when would appropriate nap time be based on their age. And then that's going to help us to determine where in that 6 to 8 p.m. range bedtime would best fall.
Yeah, that is so interesting, and I feel like we could have a talk just on that. But I definitely think that parents, if they're having fussiness or issues, I think sleep is definitely the first thing to check. But what you just mentioned, and just how much time it's been between nap time and sleep time, and just how much time it's been since they've been awake, it matters so much more than we're giving it
For
credit for.
sure. And if I could add one thing to that, because you just brought it to my attention, is a lot of families refer to sleepy cues. They'll say either, oh my gosh, they wake up and then they look tired 30 minutes later. Or they'll say they never look tired. They always have so much energy. They're never ready for bed. And so, one thing to be clear about is that those sleepy cues are actually really confusing from about 4 months and up because they don't always communicate what's actually happening inside our bodies. So even if a baby looks wide awake and it's been an appropriate amount of time and it's nap time, we would still want to initiate that nap because their body might look awake on the outside, but their sleep hormones are most likely ready to sleep on the inside. So sleepy cues are liars, unfortunately, once we get past 4 months. Prior to 4 months, for our newborns and infants, they're usually good indicators of when we need to go for the next nap. But after that, we really want to focus on timing of sleep instead of, what their body looks like or is communicating on the outside.
Yeah, and consistency. It seems like a lot of this is impacted by consistency.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we kind of went through most of the things. I just want to quickly look through. I would love for you to elaborate on how you coach parents. So I did the change in time is like a no-brainer, and I think is very useful. How are other ways that you can support
Yeah.
parents?
So I have a lot of resources for parents to listen to in a free way, just to absorb a lot of information. And the best place to go would be my podcast that's called Happy Days, Rested Nights. And it allows them to just listen to whatever topic applies to them. But I also have a lot of videos on my Instagram and a ton of videos on my TikTok that'll allow them to, gather some information. But when parents are like ready and they want to find a plan that fits their family specifically, because honestly, we live in a day and age where we have all the information at our fingertips, but sometimes we have too much information. And sometimes that information doesn't apply to our family specifically. So we want to just try our best to figure out a plan of what is my goal for my child, and then how am I going to get there specifically. So I partner with families by doing that one-on-one through coaching over the phone. I work with people all across the world. Or the most popular option is I have courses, video courses on my website that are designed to be individual. So you actually work through the course and figure out what applies to you. And by the end of it, you have your own individualized plan so that we can move forward. When we're talking about sleep, one of the best things to do is focus on consistency and avoid trial and error, because that's so confusing for our little ones. And we want to look at, how can I help them sleep better scientifically as far as how their body sleeps, but also behaviorally, which is what I use my behavioral background for, is how do I communicate clearly with them as I'm teaching them this new skill of falling asleep on their own.
Yeah. I think you have so many resources. I hope parents head over to your page. We're going to throw a link up in stories for your podcast, and head over now. There's so much practical info, and so really nothing changes until you start applying it. And there's so much more that's out on her pages to get all of that info that you need for you to start applying it. So thank you so much for joining us, Samantha, and I will see you guys all later.
Bye.